Before I get started on the movie and discussing how accurate it is, I'm going to spend this chapter just talking about the origin of the legend itself. Now, Robin Hood has been a part of English folklore for hundreds of years. The oldest surviving literary reference dates back to the 14th century. He first appeared in William Langland's The Vision of Piers Plowman, a poem that many agree came out in 1377. In it, a peasant mentions that he doesn't know the Lord's Prayer, but can recite the stories of Robin Hood. It's an offhand reference and doesn't feature as a main element of the story, but it tells us that Robin Hood was a well-known figure in the medieval world. It's likely then that Robin Hood's stories were circulating well before they appeared in text. Some historians think that he dates back to the early to the mid-13th century. The earliest surviving ballads that feature Robin Hood are from around 1450. In them, Robin Hood encounters various characters that are now staples of the legend, including Little John and the Sheriff of Nottingham. Though many of us know Robin Hood to be a mischievous, swashbuckling trickster making fools of greedy noblemen, the original Robin Hood was less jolly.
I demand to know who you are!
We are men of the hood. Marry now at your expense.
He was an outlaw and behaved like one. He lived in the greenwood of central England, usually depicted as Sherwood Forest in Nottingham. Robin Hood often wore disguises to avoid capture and did his best to outwit his enemies. In several of these early ballads, both Robin Hood and his merry men committed murder to get what they wanted. A far cry from the noble thief of today's stories. The goal was to take money off the rich, men he deemed greedy and immoral, and live off the grid in the forest. This is not the Robin Hood that stole from the rich to give to the poor. This was an English outlaw, one who represented the plight of the commoner against the might of the nobility. The original Robin Hood was a yeoman, a commoner with a small plot of land in feudal England. His initial stories commonly take place in the early 13th century, during the reign of King John. During this time, trade with the empires in the east brought money and goods to Europe. This in turn improved the standard of living, which also meant a growing population. A growing population meant more food, so peasants were burdened with more work. It was out of this feudal tension that Robin Hood was born, a yeoman, looked down upon as a dirty peasant by the social elite, because he was one of them.
What I object to is
As a character, this time played by Russell Crowe and directed by Ridley Scott. 10 years prior, the two worked together to create the cinematic masterpiece Gladiator. Sure, it was historically inaccurate, but as I said in my review 7 years ago, I still loved that film, despite its issues. Hans Zimmer's score was moving, the writing spot on, and the characters felt real. So, with the rich history surrounding Robin Hood in medieval England, I'm sure Russell Crowe and Ridley Scott made another masterpiece, right? Well, the film is set in 1199, in the midst of a political crisis. Richard the Lionheart, one of the most beloved Plantagenet kings, dies in battle. His brother John takes over as King of England. But whilst Richard was loved and respected by his people, John, not so much. He was seen as weak, impetuous, and soon political minds schemed to remove him from power. Out of this political uncertainty, we meet Robin Longstride, our titular hero, who helps change the course of English history. But does this Robin Hood fit in with the Robin Hood of legend? Is the film accurate to the real history of King John's England? Although Robin Hood is fictional, the story in the film is based on real people and events from medieval England. And in this review, we'll take a look at the legend of Robin Hood and how the character has changed over time. Then we'll analyze the film to see how historically accurate it is, and whether or not it's a convincing iteration of the classic story. This is Robin Hood. Possibly precise arrows and caught the Maid Marian. Or perhaps you grew up with the Disney version, watching Robin Hood the Fox outwit King John and the Sheriff of Nottingham. Regardless of how you got to know him, the Robin Hood legend has been around for generations. As the ultimate vehicular combat game spanning 100 years of military development, War Thunder will give you access to over 2,000 tanks, helicopters, planes, and ships, whether it's from the 1920s or from our present day. There's a vehicle that every history buff will know and love, each one authentically recreated, all the way down to the nuts and bolts. In absolutely epic combined arms PvP battles, you'll need every unit at your disposal to achieve victory. You'll be able to hear and see the action as you inflict real-time damage against enemy vehicles and their crews, all in stunning 4K resolution and with amazing graphics, of course. And what's more is that each vehicle comes with its own unique customization. You can slap on hundreds of camos and historic markings. Plus, with 3D decorators like bushes and gear, you can make each ride feel distinctly your own. And the best part of all this is that you can dive into the action for free with a choice of multiple